I gave my mother-in-law a bouquet of peonies for Mother's Day. She scoffed at the thoughtless, crappy gift and demanded a designer necklace. When I tried to explain my budget, she rolled her eyes and said, "Do you even value me?" I stayed silent. That was 2 days ago. This morning, her phone buzzed with 12 missed calls from me, and she locked herself in her car and cried until dawn. I gifted my mother-in-law flowers for Mother's Day, only for her to dismiss them as a thoughtless, crappy gift and demand an expensive necklace. My response left her utterly speechless. My mother-in-law is a kind and funny woman, though. She does have a few problems with boundaries and is a little too involved in my marriage, especially now that my wife's pregnant. My wife's family isn't well off financially, and it's the opposite with my family. My family owns a factory, and I'm an engineer. My wife's job doesn't pay well, but she's happy. Whenever I get my wife something nice, especially jewelry, I'd get a call from my mill complaining that she got nothing once she found out, even if it was my wife's birthday or our wedding anniversary. Holidays and other occasions aside, she'd throw a fit about how I treated her as less than. She always comes over, and when she notices a new piece of furniture or any new items, she complains I didn't get her similar stuff. She sent a picture of a costly necklace she wanted me to get for Mother's Day. I called her to ask about it, and she said that she'd wanted it for a while, and only I could afford it. When I told her I might not be able to get it, she replied that I had already gotten my wife an expensive necklace on Sunday and could afford it. I didn't get her necklace, and instead, I decided to get her some fresh flowers that I picked from my late mother's garden, which I trimmed, organized myself, and then put in a lovely vase. We visited Sunday evening, and my mill kept smiling till it was time for gift opening. I handed her the flowers and talked about how much time and effort I made to put everything together. She was shocked and said she thought I loved and cared enough to get her something nice, just like my wife, who technically isn't even a mother yet, and she's been a mother for 32 years. I got annoyed and said I did not appreciate her harsh response to my gift. Still, she argued with me and kept talking about how much she wanted the necklace and that I could afford it just like I was able to afford the one I got from my wife, but instead chose a thoughtless, crappy gift to give her. That pissed me off. I said that I married her daughter and not her. Of course, I was putting my wife first, and it's crazy that she thinks I'm obligated to treat her and my wife the same way. My wife looked at me and was astonished. Mill replied that I was being mean and nasty to her on purpose and rubbing my financial stability in her face and treating her as if she was greedy instead of showing her appreciation. She went inside, looking so upset that she almost cried, and my wife followed her. Suddenly, everyone was staring at me, and it was as awkward as hell. My wife snapped in the car, telling me I was way out of line for making her mom cry on Mother's Day, and said she would not let my attitude cause a rift between her and her mom. I asked if she agreed with her mom's demands, and she said no. However, I went over the top and shouldn't have spoken to her that way. She said I deeply hurt her mom's feelings and should apologize. I don't want to ruin my relationship with my mother-in-law, but I'm worried I just did. I was still pissed about the whole situation. Those flowers weren't just random blooms I picked up at the grocery store. They were from my mom's garden, something really personal to me. I'll think about apologizing, I finally said as we pulled into our driveway. Not exactly a promise, but it was all I could offer at that moment. Ellie just nodded and went straight to bed when we got home. I stayed up for a while, replaying the whole scene in my head. The more I thought about it, the more annoyed I got. I ended up sleeping on the couch that night, not because Ellie kicked me out or anything, but because I was too wound up to sleep next to her without talking, and I wasn't ready to talk yet. The next morning was awkward. We did our usual routine but barely spoke. Ellie left for work early, just saying she'd see me later. No kiss goodbye, which was unusual for us. I felt like crap as I headed to work myself. At the office, I couldn't focus. I kept checking my phone, half expecting angry texts from Richard or Morgan, but there was nothing. Around lunchtime, I got a text from Ellie asking if I'd thought more about apologizing to her mom. I didn't respond right away. I honestly didn't know what to say. My buddy William stopped by my office and immediately noticed something was up. I ended up telling him the whole story over lunch in the break room. "Dude, that's messed up," he said after I finished. "Your mother-in-law sounds like she's got some serious entitlement issues." I nodded, glad someone was on my side. Right? I mean, who demands expensive jewelry from their son-in-law? William took a bite of his sandwich and shrugged. "My wife's mom is pretty cool. She's just happy if we remember to call on her birthday. Must be nice," I muttered. "That said," William continued, "you might want to smooth things over for your wife's sake. Pregnant women and family drama don't mix well." He had a point. I knew I needed to do something, but I wasn't ready to just cave and apologize when I didn't think I was wrong. I decided to text Ellie back that we'd talk about it when I got home. The rest of the day dragged by. I was distracted during a meeting with some suppliers and nearly approved an order for the wrong parts. My dad, who still runs the company, noticed and pulled me aside afterward. "Everything okay, son? You seem off today." I gave him the abbreviated version of what happened. Dad's always been pretty straightforward, so I wasn't surprised when he didn't immediately take my side. "Sounds like you both could have handled it better," he said. "But family peace is worth swallowing your pride sometimes." "Even when I'm not wrong?" I asked. Dad just laughed. "Welcome to marriage, kid." When I got home that evening, Ellie was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. She looked tired, and I immediately felt guilty for adding stress to her pregnancy. "Hey," I said, dropping my keys on the counter. "Hey," she replied. "Bad day?" I nodded and sat across from her. "Look, about yesterday. My mom called me crying 3 times today," Ellie cut in. "3 times, Jason." I felt my jaw tighten. What did she say? That she feels unwelcome in our lives now, that she's worried you hate her, that she's afraid she won't be allowed to see her grandchild. Ellie's voice cracked a little on that last part. That's ridiculous, I said. I never said anything like that. But that's how she feels, Ellie insisted. And now she's talking about not coming to my baby shower next month because she doesn't want to cause problems. I ran my hands through my hair, frustrated. She's being manipulative, Ellie. Can't you see that? All I see is that my mom is hurting, and my husband won't apologize for hurting her feelings, Ellie shot back. What about my feelings? I asked. She insulted a really meaningful gift from my mom's garden. She called it thoughtless and crappy. Doesn't that matter? Ellie's expression softened slightly. Of course it matters. What she said was wrong too, but someone has to be the bigger person here. We went back and forth for a while, neither of us really budging. Eventually, we agreed to sleep on it, but things were still tense. I did sleep in our bed that night, but we stayed on our own sides, not touching. It felt wrong. The next few days were more of the same. Ellie kept getting calls and texts from Barbara, who was apparently still very upset. I started to feel like I was being painted as the villain in some family drama I never asked to be part of. By Friday, I'd had enough of the Cold War at home. I decided to call Richard, Barbara's husband, to get his take on things. Richard's always been a pretty reasonable guy, and I thought maybe he could help mediate. Hey Richard, it's Jason, I said when he picked up. Jason, he said, sounding surprised. Everything okay? Not really, I admitted. Things are pretty tense after what happened on Mother's Day. Richard sighed. Yeah, Barb's been pretty upset. I get that, but don't you think she overreacted a bit? I mean, those flowers were from my late mother's garden. That's a pretty personal gift. There was a pause on the line. Between you and me, Richard finally said, Barb can be a bit much sometimes, but she's got her reasons. What do you mean? I asked. Look, this isn't my story to tell, but Barb grew up with next to nothing. Her dad left when she was little, and her mom worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. She never got nice things, never felt special or valued. I think when she sees Ellie getting all these nice gifts from you, it triggers something in her. I hadn't known that about Barbara's childhood. Ellie had mentioned her grandfather wasn't in the picture, but I didn't know the details. That explains some things, I said slowly, but it doesn't make her demands reasonable. No, it doesn't, Richard agreed, and I've told her that, but understanding where she's coming from might help you deal with her better. After talking with Richard, I felt a little less angry, but still unsure about how to proceed. I decided to stop by my Aunt Sarah's place on the way home. She'd raised me after my mom died, and she always gave good advice. Aunt Sarah was in her garden when I arrived, which seemed fitting given the situation. She listened without interrupting as I told her everything. So now I'm the bad guy for standing up for myself, I finished. Aunt Sarah took off her gardening gloves and sat on a bench, patting the spot next to her. Did you like the books you got me for Mother's Day? She asked. What? Yeah, of course, I said, confused by the change of subject. And if you'd gotten me flowers from your mother's garden instead, I would have treasured them, she said, because I would understand what that meant to you. I nodded, still not sure where she was going with this. But not everyone sees gifts the same way, Jason. Some people express love through gifts, others through actions or words. It sounds like your mother-in-law values material gifts more than you do. So I should have just bought the necklace? I asked, irritated. No, Aunt Sarah shook her head. But maybe you could have approached the situation with more understanding of who she is, and maybe your response could have been gentler. I thought about that on the drive home. Maybe Aunt Sarah was right. I still didn't think I should have to buy Barbara expensive gifts, but I could have been more tactful in how I handled her reaction. When I got home, Ellie was on the phone. From her tone, I could tell she was talking to her mom. She gave me a little wave but continued her conversation, walking into the bedroom and closing the door. Not a great sign. I decided to make dinner as a peace offering. Nothing fancy, just pasta with the sauce Ellie likes. When she finally emerged from the bedroom, her eyes were a little red like she'd been crying. I made dinner, I said, trying to sound upbeat. Thanks, she said quietly, sitting at the table. We ate in uncomfortable silence for a few minutes before I couldn't take it anymore. I talked to Richard today, I said, and then I visited Aunt Sarah. Ellie looked up, surprised. What did they say? I told her about my conversations, including what Richard had shared about Barbara's childhood. I didn't know you didn't know that, Ellie said. I thought I'd told you. Maybe you did and I forgot, I admitted. But it helps explain some things. Ellie nodded. Mom's always been sensitive about money and gifts. It got worse after I met you, honestly. I think she feels like she failed somehow because she couldn't provide the kind of life for me that your family could. That was a perspective I hadn't considered. But that's not fair to put on me, I said. No, it's not, Ellie agreed. And I've told her that. But feelings aren't always rational, Jason. We talked more openly that night than we had all week. Ellie admitted that her mom's behavior was inappropriate, but she also helped me see how my response had escalated the situation instead of diffusing it. I'll apologize to her, I finally said. Not for what I said exactly, but for how I said it. Ellie smiled for what felt like the first time in days. Thank you. The next morning I called Barbara. She sounded wary when she answered. Jason, is everything okay? Is Ellie all right? Ellie's fine, I assured her. I was calling to talk about what happened on Mother's Day. There was a pause. Oh, I wanted to say I'm sorry for how I spoke to you, I said, choosing my words carefully. I was upset about your reaction to the flowers, but I could have expressed that better. Another pause. I see. This wasn't going as well as I'd hoped. The flowers were special to me because they were from my mom's garden, I continued. I thought sharing something that meaningful would show how much I value you as family. I didn't know they were that important to you, Barbara said, her voice softening slightly. I just felt overlooked. We talked for about 20 minutes. It wasn't exactly comfortable, but it felt like progress. Barbara didn't apologize for her comments about the flowers or for demanding the necklace, but she did say she understood better now why I was upset. Would you and Richard like to come over for dinner this weekend? I asked before we hung up. We could use a fresh start. I'd like that, she said, sounding genuinely pleased. When I told Ellie about the call and the dinner invitation, she hugged me tight. Thank you, she whispered against my chest. The dinner that weekend went surprisingly well. Barbara brought one of her famous apple pies, and we all made an effort to keep the conversation light and positive. We talked about the baby, about names we were considering, about the nursery I was planning to paint the following weekend. As they were leaving, Barbara hugged me, which was a bit awkward, but also nice. The flowers really were beautiful, she said quietly. I'm sorry I didn't appreciate them properly. It wasn't a full apology for everything, but it was something. I nodded and thanked her. Things seemed better after that, at least for a couple of weeks. Barbara still called Ellie almost daily, but she wasn't making comments about gifts or money. I started to think maybe we'd turned a corner. Then came Ellie's birthday in early June. I'd been planning her gift for months, a charm bracelet with birthstones representing each member of our growing family. It wasn't the most expensive piece of jewelry I'd ever bought her, but it was thoughtful and personalized. Ellie loved it. She put it on immediately and kept looking at it throughout her birthday dinner at her favorite restaurant. When we got home, she posted a picture of it on Instagram with a sweet caption about how lucky she was. The next morning, I got a text from Barbara. The bracelet is beautiful. Ellie is so lucky to have such a generous husband. I showed it to Ellie, who just shrugged. At least she's not asking for one of her own, she said, but I had a feeling it was coming. Sure enough, 2 days later, Barbara called me directly. Jason, I was wondering if you could help me with something, she began. Richard and I have our 35th anniversary next month, and I've been dropping hints about a bracelet similar to Ellie's, but I don't think he's picking up on it. I felt my stomach tighten. Here we go again. What kind of help are you looking for? I asked cautiously. Well, I thought maybe you could take him shopping. Show him where you got Ellie's bracelet. I know he can't afford exactly the same thing, but something similar would be nice. It wasn't a direct request for me to buy her a bracelet, which was an improvement, I guess, but it still felt manipulative. I'm not sure Richard would appreciate me interfering like that, I said. Men can be funny about that kind of thing. Oh, he wouldn't mind, Barbara insisted. He's always saying how he wishes he had your eye for gifts. I highly doubted Richard had ever said any such thing, but I didn't call her on it. Let me think about it, I said instead. When I told Ellie about the call, she looked embarrassed. I'm sorry, she said. I should have known posting about the bracelet would trigger this. It's not your fault, I assured her. You should be able to post about your birthday gift without worrying about your mom's reaction. We decided I'd offer to help Richard find a gift that was within his budget, but I wouldn't suggest anything specific or pressure him to spend more than he was comfortable with. I called Richard the next day and made the offer as casually as I could. Barbara mentioned your anniversary is coming up. If you need any gift ideas, I'm happy to help. Richard sounded surprised but not upset. That's thoughtful of you, Jason. I was thinking of getting her a new sewing machine, actually. Her old one's been giving her trouble. That sounds perfect, I said, relieved that he already had a plan. I'm sure she'll love it. But when I reported back to Ellie that Richard had his own gift idea, she looked worried. Mom's going to be disappointed if she's expecting jewelry and gets a sewing machine instead. That's not really our problem though, is it? I pointed out. Richard knows his wife better than we do. Ellie bit her lip. Maybe, but I don't want another blow up like Mother's Day. I could see where this was heading. Ellie, no, I'm not buying your mom a bracelet for her anniversary. That's Richard's job. I know, Ellie said quickly. I'm not suggesting that. Maybe just, I don't know, maybe we could get her something small, as a surprise? Not jewelry, but something nice? I wasn't thrilled about the idea, but I could see it was important to Ellie, so I agreed we'd find a small gift to give Barbara on her anniversary. Nothing extravagant, just a token. We ended up getting her a nice scarf and a gift card to her favorite restaurant, so she and Richard could have a meal out. It seemed like a reasonable compromise, thoughtful, but not over the top. Their anniversary fell on a Tuesday, so we dropped by their house Monday evening to give them our gift. Barbara seemed genuinely pleased with the scarf, wrapping it around her neck immediately and admiring it in the hallway mirror. This is so thoughtful, she said, giving both of us hugs. You didn't have to get us anything. I caught Ellie's eye, and we shared a small smile of relief. Maybe things really were improving. The next evening, we got a call from Barbara. She was crying. Mom, what's wrong? Ellie asked, putting the phone on speaker so I could hear. Richard got me a sewing machine, Barbara sobbed. A sewing machine for our 35th anniversary. Ellie shot me a look that clearly said, I told you so. Isn't that good? Ellie asked her mom. Didn't your old one break down? That's not the point, Barbara wailed. A sewing machine is a practical gift, not a romantic one. 35 years together, and he gets me something I use to mend his shirts. I had to bite my tongue to keep from pointing out that Richard had chosen something he knew she needed and would use regularly. Instead, I let Ellie handle the call, which went on for nearly an hour. When she finally hung up, Ellie looked exhausted. She's really upset, she said unnecessarily. I heard, I replied, but that's between her and Richard. Ellie nodded, but she looked troubled. She kept comparing it to the bracelet you got me. Of course she did. Ellie, we can't keep getting drawn into this. Your mom needs to work on her expectations and her relationship with Richard without involving us. I know you're right, Ellie sighed, rubbing her baby bump absently. It's just hard. I hate hearing her so upset. The next few days were tense again. Barbara kept calling Ellie to complain about Richard's gift and how unappreciated she felt. Ellie was stressed, which made me worried about her and the baby. I tried to be supportive without getting pulled into the drama, but it wasn't easy. Then on Friday, Richard called me. Jason, I need your advice, he said, sounding defeated. Barb's still upset about the sewing machine. I thought she'd be happy. She's been complaining about her old one for months. I know, Richard. She called Ellie crying about it. Richard sighed heavily. She keeps talking about that bracelet you got, Ellie. I can't afford something like that, Jason. We're on a fixed income now that I'm retired. I felt bad for the guy. He tried to get his wife something she needed and was getting grief for it. What are you thinking of doing? I asked. I don't know, he admitted. I was thinking of returning the sewing machine and getting her something else, but I'm not sure what. And honestly, we really can't afford much more. An idea started forming in my mind. It was probably stupid, and it might backfire completely, but it might also help resolve this situation once and for all. Richard, what if I talk to Barbara? I suggested. Not to interfere in your marriage, I added quickly, but to help her understand that different people show love in different ways. My aunt was just telling me about this recently. Richard was quiet for a moment. You think that would help? She's pretty set in her ways. I don't know, I said honestly, but I'm willing to try if you are. Richard agreed, sounding grateful for any potential solution. We decided I'd come over the next day when Ellie was at her prenatal yoga class. That way, I could talk to Barbara one-on-one without putting Ellie in the middle. I spent that night researching the love languages concept my aunt had mentioned. It was interesting stuff. The idea that people express and receive love differently, through gifts, quality time, acts of service, physical touch, or words of affirmation. I could definitely see how mismatched love languages could cause problems in relationships. The next morning, I felt nervous as I drove to Richard and Barbara's house. I wasn't sure how she'd react to me showing up unannounced, especially given our recent history. But Richard had texted that he'd be out running errands, so at least I'd have a chance to talk to her alone. Barbara looked surprised when she opened the door. Jason, is everything okay? Is Ellie all right? Everything's fine, I assured her, noticing this was becoming her standard greeting whenever I called or visited. I was hoping we could talk for a few minutes. She hesitated, then stepped back to let me in. Of course. Would you like some coffee? I accepted the offer, and we sat at her kitchen table with steaming mugs. I noticed the sewing machine was set up in the corner of the dining room, still in its box. So, Barbara said, after an awkward silence, what did you want to talk about? I took a deep breath. This conversation could go very wrong very quickly if I wasn't careful. I wanted to talk about the sewing machine, I said, deciding directness was the best approach. Richard called me yesterday. He's pretty upset that you didn't like his gift. Barbara's face hardened. Did he send you here to lecture me? No, not at all, I said quickly. He doesn't even know I'm here. I came because I care about both of you, and I think there might be a misunderstanding happening. She looked skeptical, but didn't throw me out, which I took as a good sign. Have you ever heard of love languages? I asked. Barbara looked at me like I just started speaking a foreign language. Love what now? Love languages, I repeated. It's this concept about how different people express and receive love in different ways. Some people value gifts, others value time together, or acts of service, or physical touch, or words of affirmation. She took a sip of her coffee, still looking skeptical. And what does this have to do with Richard getting me a sewing machine for our anniversary? Well, I said, trying to choose my words carefully, I think you and Richard might have different love languages. You seem to really value gifts as expressions of love. There's nothing wrong with that. But Richard might express his love through acts of service or other ways. So you're saying I'm materialistic? She said flatly. No, not at all, I said quickly. I'm saying that for you, receiving thoughtful gifts makes you feel loved and valued. That's completely valid. But for Richard, maybe buying you something practical that helps you do something you enjoy is his way of showing love. Barbara stared into her coffee cup for a long moment. He did say he thought I'd be happy because I've been complaining about my old machine for months. Exactly, I said, feeling a glimmer of hope. In his mind, he was being thoughtful by listening to your complaints and getting you something that would make your life easier. She didn't look entirely convinced, but she wasn't arguing either. I decided to push a little further. Can I ask you something personal, Barbara? She nodded cautiously. Richard mentioned that you guys are on a fixed income now that he's retired. Is it possible that part of your reaction is because you're worried about money? Her eyes welled up suddenly, and I worried I'd gone too far, but then she nodded. We're okay month to month, she said quietly, but there's not much extra. When I see what you can give Ellie, it reminds me that I can't have nice things, and Richard can't give me nice things. It makes me feel like I failed somehow. This was exactly what Ellie had suggested. I reached across the table and tentatively put my hand on Barbara's. You haven't failed, I said firmly. You raised an amazing daughter who I'm lucky to be married to. You and Richard have been together for 35 years, which is incredible. Success isn't measured by the price tag of your anniversary gifts. A tear slipped down her cheek. I know that. Logically, I know that. But sometimes it's hard to remember. We talked for almost an hour. Barbara opened up about her childhood, confirming what Richard had told me about growing up poor. She admitted that she sometimes felt jealous of what I could provide for Ellie, even though she was happy her daughter had a good life. And I think I've been taking that out on you, she said eventually, which isn't fair. I haven't always handled things well either, I admitted. Like on Mother's Day. I should have been more understanding about why you were upset, even if I didn't agree with what you were asking for. She nodded. Those flowers really were beautiful. I just couldn't see it at the time because I was so focused on what I didn't get. We were still talking when Richard came home. He looked shocked to see us sitting together at the kitchen table, especially when he noticed Barbara's tear-stained face. Everything okay? He asked warily. Barbara stood up and went to him, giving him a hug that clearly surprised him. I'm sorry I've been so difficult about the sewing machine, she said. It was a thoughtful gift, and I do need it. Richard looked over her shoulder at me with wide eyes. I just shrugged and smiled. I think I'll head out, I said, standing up. Thanks for the coffee, Barbara. She broke away from Richard to walk me to the door. Thank you for coming over, she said. It helped to talk. Anytime, I said, and was surprised to realize I meant it. On the drive home, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. I wasn't naive enough to think one conversation had solved all our problems, but it felt like a step in the right direction. When I got home, Ellie was back from yoga, looking relaxed and happy. Her face lit up when I walked in. "Hey, where have you been?" she asked. I tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. "Sorry, I had my phone on silent," I said, sitting next to her on the couch. "I was at your parents' house, actually." Her eyebrows shot up. "What? Why?" I told her about my conversation with Richard and my visit with Barbara. As I talked, Ellie's expression changed from surprise to concern to cautious hope. "So you think she's really going to be okay with the sewing machine?" she asked when I finished. "I think so," I said. She seemed to understand better where Richard was coming from, and I think it helped her to talk about why gifts are so important to her. Ellie leaned over and kissed me. "Thank you for doing that. I know my mom can be difficult. She's going to be our baby's grandmother," I said, putting my hand on Ellie's belly. "It's worth making the effort." The next few weeks were busy with baby preparations. We finished setting up the nursery, went to childbirth classes, and had a final ultrasound that confirmed we were having a girl. Through it all, things remained relatively peaceful with Barbara. She still called Ellie daily, but the conversations were more about the baby and less about complaints or comparisons. Then came Ellie's baby shower, which Barbara had insisted on hosting despite her earlier threats not to attend. I was nervous about it, but I needn't have been. Barbara was the perfect hostess, making sure everyone had food and drinks, and keeping the games and gift opening running smoothly. I showed up at the end to help load all the gifts into our car. Barbara pulled me aside as Ellie was saying goodbye to the last guests. "I got something for you," she said, handing me a small wrapped package. "It's not much, but I wanted to say thank you for your patience with me." Surprised, I opened it to find a framed photo of Ellie as a baby, sleeping in Barbara's arms. It was a beautiful shot, and I could see the resemblance to our recent ultrasound pictures. "I thought you might like to have this for your office," Barbara said, "since you'll have your own daughter soon." I was genuinely touched. "Thank you, Barbara. This is perfect." She smiled, looking pleased. "I know I'm not always easy to deal with, but I do appreciate how good you are to Ellie, and I'm trying to be better about, well, everything. We're family," I said simply. "We'll figure it out as we go." 2 weeks later, Ellie went into labor 3 weeks early. It was a hectic rush to the hospital, with me trying to remember everything from our childbirth classes while also not crashing the car. I called Barbara and Richard from the hospital while Ellie was being checked in. "We're on our way," Barbara said immediately. "Do you need us to bring anything?" "No, I think we're good," I said. "Just wanted to let you know it's happening." They arrived about an hour later, just as things were starting to get intense. Barbara took one look at Ellie, who was breathing through a contraction, and went straight into mom mode. "You're doing great, sweetheart," she said, taking Ellie's hand. "Remember to breathe just like they taught you." For the next 14 hours, Barbara was a rock. She helped Ellie walk the halls when the nurses suggested it might speed things up. She got ice chips and cool washcloths. She even stepped out to get me coffee when I was starting to fade around hour 10. Richard mostly stayed in the waiting room, looking uncomfortable whenever the medical details got too specific. But Barbara never left Ellie's side, except when the doctors needed space to work. When our daughter finally arrived, red-faced and screaming, I felt a wave of emotion so intense I could barely stand. The nurse placed her on Ellie's chest, and we both cried as we met our little girl for the first time. "She's perfect," Ellie whispered, touching our daughter's tiny fingers. After a while, once Ellie and the baby were cleaned up and settled, I went to the waiting room to get Barbara and Richard. Barbara jumped up as soon as she saw me. "Well?" she demanded. "How are they?" "They're both doing great," I said, unable to stop smiling. "Want to come meet your granddaughter?" Barbara's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, seemingly unable to speak. When we got back to the room, Ellie was holding the baby, looking tired but radiant. She smiled when she saw her parents. "Mom, Dad, meet Lily Sarah," she said, using the name we'd chosen to honor both our mothers. Barbara approached the bed slowly, as if afraid to disturb them. "Oh, Ellie," she breathed. "She's beautiful. Do you want to hold her?" Ellie asked. The look on Barbara's face when we placed Lily in her arms was something I'll never forget. Pure joy, mixed with wonder, and a fierce kind of love that I was just beginning to understand myself. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I'm your grandma." Richard stood behind her, peering over her shoulder at the baby. "She's got your nose, Ellie," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. We all took turns holding Lily, taking pictures, and just marveling at how perfect she was. The nurses eventually shooed Richard and Barbara out, saying Ellie needed rest, but they promised to come back the next day. As they were leaving, Barbara hugged me tightly. "Thank you for giving us such a beautiful granddaughter," she said, "and for making our Ellie so happy." "Thank you for raising such an amazing daughter," I replied. The next few months were a blur of sleepless nights, diaper changes, and the kind of exhausted happiness I'd never known was possible. Barbara came over almost every day at first, bringing food, doing laundry, or just holding Lily so Ellie and I could nap or shower. I expected to find her constant presence annoying, but honestly, I was grateful for the help. And watching her with Lily, I saw a side of Barbara I'd never seen before. Patient, gentle, and completely focused on what Lily needed, rather than what she wanted. One evening, about 3 months after Lily was born, Barbara and Richard came over for dinner. Lily was being fussy, and nothing Ellie or I did seemed to calm her down. Without a word, Barbara took her from me and started walking around the living room, humming softly. Within minutes, Lily was quiet, her eyes drooping. How did you do that? I asked, amazed. Barbara smiled. Practice. Ellie was the same way at this age. Only thing that worked was walking and humming. Later, after we'd eaten and Lily was asleep in her bassinet, Richard mentioned they were thinking of taking a weekend trip for their upcoming birthdays, which were just a few days apart. Nothing fancy, he said. Just a couple days at that bed and breakfast up in the mountains. That sounds nice, Ellie said. You guys deserve a getaway. I had an idea. Why don't we watch the house for you while you're gone? It would be a nice change of scenery for us, and you wouldn't have to worry about anything while you're away. Richard looked pleased with the suggestion, but Barbara hesitated. That's very kind, but you have your hands full with Lily. We can just have the neighbors check in. Actually, I think it would be good for us, I said. Your place is all on one level, which would be easier with the baby than our stairs, and the backyard is perfect for when we need some fresh air. Barbara still looked uncertain, so I added, plus, it would give us a chance to water your garden. Those roses you planted last month need regular attention, right? That did it. Barbara had started gardening more seriously after our Mother's Day incident, even asking me for advice about some of the plants. She was particularly proud of her new rose bushes. Well, if you're sure it wouldn't be too much trouble, she said. Not at all, I assured her. We'd be happy to do it. The weekend of their trip, we moved temporarily into their house with Lily and all her gear. It was actually a nice break from our routine. Their house was cozy and comfortable, and as I'd pointed out, the lack of stairs made moving around with the baby easier. On their second day away, while Lily was napping and Ellie was reading, I went out to water Barbara's garden. As I moved among the plants with the watering can, I found myself thinking about my mom's garden and how much she would have loved meeting Lily. On impulse, I cut a few of the nicest roses and some greenery to make a small bouquet. I found a vase in the kitchen cabinet and arranged them on the dining table with a note. Happy birthday from all of us. Thanks for everything you do for our family. When Barbara and Richard returned the next day, her face lit up when she saw the flowers. These are beautiful, she said, touching one of the blooms gently. From your garden? No, from yours, I said. I thought you might enjoy them inside where you can see them more often. She read the note and looked up at me with damp eyes. Thank you, Jason. That's very thoughtful. I learned from the best, I said, nodding at Ellie, who was feeding Lily on the couch. Barbara laughed. Yes, you did. As we packed up to head home, I realized something had shifted in my relationship with Barbara. We weren't best friends, and we probably never would be. She still had her moments of being too demanding or boundary crossing, but we understood each other better now, and there was a genuine affection between us that hadn't been there before. Lily had changed everything, in the best possible way. She'd given Barbara a new focus for all that energy and love, and she'd given me a new perspective on family, how it's messy and complicated and sometimes drives you crazy, but it's worth every bit of effort you put into it. As we drove home with Lily sleeping in her car seat, Ellie reached over and squeezed my hand. That was nice, she said. You and Mom seem to be getting along better these days. Yeah, I agreed. I think we finally figured out how to be family, and we had. It wasn't perfect, and I knew there would still be bumps along the way. But for now, with my wife beside me and our daughter sleeping peacefully behind us, everything felt pretty damn good.